And we are live. Greetings, salutations, and all that jazz. And welcome to a very special interview with a very special human. Wolfgang, welcome
Oh,
once again to our live stream.
uh,
How are you doing?
I am fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is always a pleasure. Wolfgang has not just become my favorite person to talk to online, he has become one of my favorite people to talk to offline as we've got to know
Woohoo!
each other more. And we just can't stop talking about nerdy things like castles. So when he said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing about castles," I said, "We have to talk about castles on live stream." Which is what we're going to be doing today. Fantasy Castles is the name of the game. 4 RPGs, 4 fantasy novels, whatever we are creating for, fantasy castles can be so much fun. And I cannot think of a better person to talk about them with. Wolfgang, do you have a favorite castle?
I have many favorite castles. This is like asking about your favorite children. It's a nasty question because I love them all.
Uh,
Um, but I do have a favorite. It's an obscure Swiss castle named Kiburg outside Zurich. Old 8th or 9th century castle, rebuilt in the 13th century, rebuilt again. It's not big, it's not famous, but it was the one I visited as a very young man. My Swiss cousins said, "Well, we hear you like nerdy things like Dungeons and Dragons, whatever that is, right? And we will take you to our local castle." And I loved it. It's still
so this
open
was
to the
your
public.
castle deflowering, as it were.
Yes, it was my
You were
very
a castle
first, my first
virgin.
time. And, I came from the suburbs of Chicago. We didn't have castles. We barely had like turrets on our high schools, right? It was it was wonderful. It felt old and magical, and there were cobblestones and the portcullis, and I loved everything about it. Um, and I wasn't very particular, right? Like there was a dungeon with an Iron Maiden in it, but it was
Mm.
clearly a fake. But I was like 11 or 12 and I didn't care because Iron Maiden.
Right. Okay.
Ah, it was great. So yes, that's still sort of the one I think of. But since then I've gotten more particular, right? Like there are palace style castles, there are 19th century reconstructions, there are historic places. They all have something to offer, and every chance I get, I will drag myself off to one of these.
Love that. Folks, if you have favorite castles, throw them into the chat. You never know, you might discover a new one near you didn't know existed. I will say my favorite castle is Rochester Castle. Do you know why, Wolfgang?
Rochester. Why Rochester?
It was
Historic
built
reasons.
by Gandalf.
Yes.
Well, actually,
What?
it was built by Gundulf. But it's thought that
Mmm.
Gundulf was the one of the inspirations for Gandalf
Gandalf.
in the Lord of the
Ah.
Rings. So Gundulf of Rochester was a Norman monk who was appointed Bishop of Rochester, and he built Rochester Cathedral. And Rochester Castle. So yes, there are other reasons why I like it. It's a fantastic, very early Norman castle, but also
Right.
it was built by Gandalf, guys. Can we just for a second?
I mean, who built it and when is hugely important, right?
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things I learned over time, right, about castles is there's never just one builder. Like,
Mm.
there's the person who built the first tower, there's the person who built the retaining wall, there's the person who paid for the moat, there's the king who came in and imprisoned his mistress there, then there's the people who rebuilt it for gunpowder, and then there's the 19th century coal baron who said, "Well, this is a nice pile of rocks, and I'd like to make it a vacation home for my family," right?
Yeah,
And they're all builders, and they all had really different goals.
absolutely. I will say, Wolfgang, I'm being a terrible host. I am getting ahead of myself. I have not even introduced you properly
Oh,
because I just
sure.
got so excited about talking about castles. So, as you can tell, Wolfgang Baur is awesome, but he is also one of the biggest names in tabletop gaming, as well as the head of Kobold Pres. He's the main brain behind the Midgard setting, and he has most recently, according to the CV, worked on Ghost of Saltmarsh, Courts of the Shadowfey, Monsters, Scarlet Citadel, Southlands for the 5th edition,
Hmm.
Vault of Magic guest designer, and of course, Tales of the Valiant.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes.
Big
Tales of the
thing.
Valiant. This is our Black Flag role playing, is sort of how this was first put out. And it's, well, fifth edition got put in the Creative Commons with the intent that anyone could remix and reuse it in any fashion whatsoever. So the Cobalt said, why don't we? Why don't we make our own RPG that is 5th edition compatible with Kobold Spin, with all the things we've been building for 17 years at Kobold Pres. And we've had a massive public playtest all summer long. Something like 50,000 players at this point. So many playtest reports. And it's coming together beautifully. So yes, tabletop RPG, if you are looking for a hot-rodded, sleek, delightful take on 5th edition, this is it. There's also talesofthevaliant.com with more information.
I'm super excited, but let's talk about castles. I want to
Yes.
start with a very big question, I suppose, a very conceptual question. Why castles? What's the attraction of castles? Why do we, as storytellers, as
Right.
writers, as GMs, why do we keep coming back to castles?
I thought about this sort of topic a lot in the Castles and Crowns context, and in every
Imagine.
game I design, and every time I do something like Courts of the Shadowfey. It's like, why does it have to be at the castle? I think the castle is to the kingdom or the landscape or the region the same way the throne is to the throne room, right? It is the physical representation of power and authority, right? It's where things happen. It's a military place, but it's also sort of a dominant bit of architecture in the landscape, right? If you don't go to the castle, you're not dealing with the big shots.
Yeah.
And storytelling, it's rarely about the peasant view of the situation, right? Sometimes, but in a lot of fantasy, it's what do the nobles think, or what does the heir think, and where do you find the heir? Where do you find the court wizard? Well, at the castle, of course. That's where everything happens.
Yeah.
So it's a hub, I think, is the answer, right? It's a hub of politics, money, military power, and so that makes it a hub for stories.
Absolutely. And I think that the other thing is that you get with castles, it's a place that, there is a seat of power there. It's this very strong icon, but it's also a really good seat of internal drama. If you're doing political schisms behind closed doors, you have the upstairs and the downstairs, you have things overheard, you have, so much potential for all of these people thrown together in this very unique context. It's not just power play, it's also role play, it's political play, it's intrigue. There's so many layers, no pun intended. There are so many layers and so many stories. Again, no pun
right?
intended.
Who is that man in the iron mask imprisoned, right? Like, it's
Exactly.
absolutely. All those stories come together in a limited space. And I think the other thing that's important about that limited space is, by and large, you are forced by the power dynamics of the castle to be nice to people you would not be nice to otherwise, right? So this is why intrigue thrives, and spying, and romance and politics happen there, because you can't just kill each other on the castle grounds, much as you might like to. So you can put the arch villain court wizard in with the paladin who's sworn to, bring him in. And as long as the ruler of the castle says, no sword play here, Sir Percival, there will be no sword play here. And you can have wonderful role-playing opportunities, and you can let villains monologue to their heart's content, because they know, haha, you can't arrest me. The king says no.
I think the other reason that we are so attracted to castles, or that I'm so attracted to castles for sure, is that they are physical history. They are, as an archaeologist, they are what we call sites of multiple habitations. So you rarely get a castle that has not been a castle for quite a while. Like, we'll talk a minute about where to put your castles, but they tend to be these defended locations these defensible locations. So you tend to have lots and lots of habitation layers, one after the other. So they become this like accrual of secrets and legend and history. And you get this library that somebody started and people have been added to since the 12th century. And there's so much like history and legend there.
Yes, I actually saw it this summer at a couple of castles. One of which is Kreutzenberg, and it's outside of Vienna on a hill. Of
Mm.
course, it's on a hill. And I was very tired by the time I got up there. My wife and I were on bikes. We went up, and we got there, but we were a little exhausted. And then we saw the view over the river and the landscape, and it was magnificent. And we got the tour, and they told us, oh, well, what you're looking at now, of course, is, Count Olaf's version of this. I'm like, who was he? 19th century fellow, big in Austrian politics. Okay, well, why did he rebuild the castle? Because the Swedish army destroyed it 100 years prior. Oh, well, why did the Swedes destroy? Well, it was in their way. The Swedes at that time, right? And they went through the layers of, well, it was never a Roman site, but it certainly dates back to the medieval period. And then other places I've been to, right? Like they really will tell you, here are the Roman coins we found down in the well. Or here's the crypt that the archbishop put together in the 8th century, and it's the only part of the 8th century that's still left is the crypt. So those layers, I adore them. Yeah. But in a fantasy context, I want to make those layers a little crazier than, Count who rebuilt after the Swedes burned it down. Yeah. I want it to be like the dwarven merchant comes in and says, well, this was an elf castle, but they can't build for crap, so I'm going to build it my way. And, the dwarf merchant comes in and he's nouveau riche, and he's like splashing out money to put his own smelting forge where the cherry tree used to stand in the courtyard, and he's totally ruined the place. Yeah. But it could be delightful for the elves to show up and say, oh my God, he has ruined the place, but at least the crypts are still there. Those sorts of like when you combine multiple cultures and multiple layers of history, you give everybody a reason to be interested in the castle, right? What secrets does it have for Group A? What secrets does it have for Group B?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things when I go visit castles, which I do frequently because I am a giant nerd, is looking at the graffiti. And that's another thing where, you see all these different layers of different people who came here. You'll see graffiti in different languages. Now, can you imagine if they were magical sigils? Can I just?
Yes, I think so. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's the tower we can't go in because it's been warded for 100 years. Yeah. Well, aren't any of you curious? Well, we are, but no one can get through. You, dear visiting wizard.
After the 6th guy died, we got less curious, And this is where you leave the realm of, the attraction of medieval castles, and you can really dial it up to 11 with the attraction of fantasy castles. Like you can take all of these stories and all of this lore and really say, but what if magic?
Right. But what if magic? I was on a road trip a little while ago through the Pacific Northwest, and in particular, Idaho. And there's a place called Miracle Hot Springs, which made me say, I really need to do more with castles and moats, because Miracle Hot Springs is a set of hot springs in Idaho that hosts a population of alligators. And I said to myself, I need alligators in a moat somewhere in the Northlands. Like the water is steaming hot. Somebody brought alligators up from Florida to Idaho in the freezing winter. And the alligators love it as long as they don't go more than 50 yards away from the moat. I mean,
which is kind of ideal, right? If you want alligators, like if you have alligators in the moat, you want them to stay in the moat.
Yeah, you don't want them wandering off to town. How do you do that? Well, it's a cold climate. I'm thinking any Nordic, temperate, wintry climate. It's like put alligators in your moat, then just magically heat the moat. Done.
Amanda Hammond in the chat says, I am here to politely demand alligator spa. I can see them in like the little alligator bikinis.
Right?
Yeah, I'm here for it.
It's been there 100 years. If you ever get to Idaho, Miracle Hot Springs, go for it.
Do you know what? Now I'm going to Idaho. I didn't know it wasn't on my map. Now it's happening. So speaking of maps, one of the, and we'll talk more about common mistakes later, but one of the common mistakes I see with castles when people put them on a map is they put them in random spots where they feel like it would be great to have a story-shaped castle here. Let's talk about castles, where castles are supposed to go. Where's the best place to put your fantasy castle on a map?
Right, and I think there are at least two correct answers. The status castle, the I'm your king and you must know it, belongs in a high and visible place, right? I am the queen of, you know, wherever, and I want you to see my castle on a hill from miles around and be very, very impressed. It's also hard to lay siege to a castle on a hill, but really, I think it's a status thing. You're up on a mountaintop. It's very impressive. It's more expensive to build. Everyone says, "How did you build that thing up there?" Right? That's the one correct answer. The other correct answer is the robber baron or the military answer, which is you put it on a river and you charge everyone money,
Mm.
like the Rhine castles, or you put it in a choke point, right, at a bridge, on a pass, at some point, a crossroads, any military significant point. It doesn't need to be tall. It can be ugly, right? But if it's the entrance to Rome and you put a castle there, well, you just improved the entrance to Rome from a military point of view. So
Absolutely. The White Tower, so the Tower of London, the big castle in London, is absolutely that. It controls the River Thames, which is the major river in London.
right.
My other favorite example of this is Stirling Castle. So
Yes.
there's saying, "He who holds Stirling holds the north," and the reason that that
Yes.
is that Stirling was between a marsh and a mountain. So if you
Right.
wanted to move an army, you had to move it past Stirling. So it's area of control. It's
Yes.
literally, I put my castle here so I can see everything that's going on and control who is passing through my territory. And I
Yes.
think whenever you're building military castles, which many castles start as, at least in the real world, start by thinking about areas of control. Where do I want to exert my army's authority or stop people going through?
Right. And sometimes it's not even so much army of control. When I said robber barons on the Rhine, I really do mean it. The German word for a certain castle type is the Kettenturm.
Mm.
Kettenturm means chain tower. And
Oh,
all it does is it puts an iron chain across the river. You have these on the Danube, you have them on the Rhine, and yeah, you want to float a barge or a ship or, you know, a galley full of troops up or down the river. Well, I have a chain tower here that's going to cost you.
yeah,
And they
absolutely.
weren't even kings. They were really just bandits with, you know, fortifications.
Yeah, absolutely. Bandits with money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's and that again, like that's something that reminds me a lot of the river kingdoms
Yes. Game
in
of Thrones.
Galarian, for example,
Yes. Oh,
and Game of
yes.
Thrones.
Both.
Um, but you see these in harbors as well as harbor defenses. So these
Yes.
big kind of harbor chains that you'll see, which again usually used for defenses, but hey, you could totally use them for making sure people are paying their taxes.
Right. Yeah. Now it's a useful tool. Um, it's even more magical if the chain winds itself, or if, you know, enormous dragons sit at the tower, sort of lurking and looking at the ships going by. But it's the same principle. You're exerting control over movement.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. And again, that's the kind of thing where the fantasy can throw a wedge in there. Like, what if your ship can levitate? What if you're like no, not
rubber barons
necessarily
hate
flight, but
that.
right, exactly. Or what if the chain has particular properties that only let certain people through, or what have you? Like this, there's a
Right.
lot of interesting things that you can start to do with it when you throw fantasy into that mix.
Yes. Yes. Um, I think those sorts of castles to exert areas of control, um, they can take wild and wonderful forms. They don't have to be, you know, inhabited by humans, dwarves, and elves, or any of your classic fantasy races. Some of my favorite castles that are about exerting control are actually the villainous ones, like a castle full of ghosts and death knights and, you
Mm,
know, gray riders that, like, well, the Lich King lives there. Well, what does he do? Well, he's undead and no one goes there to ask him why he's there, right? Like,
right.
it's sort of irresistible to a certain type of role player to say, well, why don't we go? Well, I have a letter for the Lich King. Would you deliver it? Sure, I would. Right. And now maybe you're using the culture and the norms of couriers and messengers to say, you can't kill me, Lich King. I'm just going to look around your castle, deliver your letter, and leave. Um,
Literally, don't shoot the messenger.
right? Literally don't. But it's a blast to make a castle for some group that is very far afield from medieval standard humans built this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on that idea, what for you defines a castle? What are the
Mm,
architectural elements that we're looking at? What makes a castle as opposed to just house with cannons on it?
sure. I think I have a broad and ecumenical view of what constitutes a castle, that it's really any defensible point, right? And
Mhm.
I am willing to allow things like wooden palisades to be, those are fortresses. But for me, a castle is probably stone or more durable than wood.
Mm,
And it is a stronghold meant to keep people out and keep other people in. It's just something that works as a barrier. So from my perspective, a great tower could be a castle even without retaining walls, moats, and the like. If you have a drawbridge and a big tower, close. It's a watch castle. It's a it's a small castle.
yeah.
But I think the defining element really is you're excluding um, the majority of the world and protecting either a location or a family is usually the incentive, right? Like there's reasons that castles are named after particular people as often as they are particular places. Um, so yeah, if it doesn't have a wall, if it's not defensible, if it's not stone, then I might say it's not a castle.
Yeah, fair. And so for you, a castle it's got to have a wall, it's got to
Yep.
be significant, it's got to
Yep.
have defense in mind as a structure. And
Sure. I
beyond that,
mean,
it could be a tower, a Motte and Bailey castle, sort of dealer's choice.
there are so many. I mean, over the years, when you start thinking about gunpowder castles, right, where you get all these star fortifications and diamond shaped ramparts, that's a completely different look than medieval castles or old Motte and Bailey stuff. Um, but in every case, the idea is you stay out. I've got this. Um,
I like that. And I will say one of the critical things there is you stay out, but also this is our grain. A lot of the
yes.
in France, especially, a lot of the big kind of chateaus, they're defensive, they're defense, they're defended. There we are. I can speak this language. I swear.
Defended. Yes.
They're defended, but they're in these very flat locations, and essentially they are the defended grain storage for all of the
Yes.
fields around. So in a way, they're not following any of those rules we said about where to put your castle on the map,
Right.
because they are there to hold the assets. They're essentially giant treasury chests with walls.
Fortified granaries,
Yeah,
fortified
exactly.
treasure chests. Well, I mean, Tower of London and most of the royal castles have some role, a lot of them as mints or
Mm,
as counting houses and storehouses or where you keep the crown jewels, right? Like
yeah,
this is still the case.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, so yeah, if it's valuable, it goes on the inside.
Okay, that segues very nicely for me too. Castle rooms. This is
Mm,
something a lot of people wonder. They think about a castle, they think about the walls, and then they go,
yes.
"Oh crap, what goes inside my castle?" For you, what rooms should a fantasy castle have? What feels iconic and important to
We
you?
talked about this a lot when designing castles and crowns,
I
and
imagine.
yes, and it's a wonderful checklist of things that could go on the inside. In the movies, you might think that every castle consists entirely of a wall, a courtyard, and an audience chamber, right?
Mm,
And that's it. But right, of course, there's a castle kitchen. Of course, there's a stable. Of course, there's living quarters, which might not be for nobles. It might just be a barracks and a garrison, right? So part of it's what's the function of this castle and who lives here. Um, but the stuff that's most fun for storytelling are things like the crypts or dungeons, anything where the hero's journey can take place going under the castle. It's locked up, it's dark, it's spooky. Um, and to some degree, I think the towers. I mean, you see this in Lord of the Rings. You see it in, I don't know, the Two Princes in the Tower, bits of history, right? Um, the idea of someone either, or well, um, basically anyone kept prisoner is kept prisoner in a tower. It's tradition, people.
Yeah.
And in fantasy, the moment you say that, it's, well, can we land on the tower? Can we climb up the vines and through the window? All that. But it encourages not the spooky, let's go underground. It encourages the, can we rescue the prince? Can we free the wrongfully imprisoned, right? Can we get Robin Hood out of this mess? And those stories, I mean, they're so deeply associated with castles because castles are seats of authority. Who's making the arrests? Well, it's the sheriff, the king, the prince, the bad duke. So it's the seat of authority, and subverting it is what the tower is about for me. But
I love that. It's also something that's literally difficult to attain, I think.
yes,
Like
yes,
that's struggle. Do you know what I mean? Like you literally have to climb the tower somehow.
yep. And it's quite thrilling as a story, right? Like we see people attempt this from, I don't know, Errol Flynn days on, right, on film. Video games will occasionally do the vertical stuff, but every tabletop role-playing game, you know, there are rules for how to climb a cliff, a tower, and get in. The throne room is the one that I sort of glossed past at the beginning, but it really is the audience chamber, the great hall. That's the one that, I mean, I said before, the Queen's Castle, the King's Castle is all about status and look at me. And the audience chamber is the interior version of that, right? You've been allowed onto the castle grounds. We trust you're not going to kill the court wizard. Now you're allowed into the audience chamber. And it's a whole nother place to show off with whatever conveys status in your particular world.
Yeah, grandeur and that thing. And I
Yeah.
think the castle as the seat of diplomacy is another thing that we haven't touched on yet. But, you know, we've
Yes.
touched on intrigue and conniving and, you know,
Mhm.
closed door deals. But the castle is really, as you were saying, like you put the castle on the hill because it's defensible. I have watched first year students in Roman armor run up a hill, and by the time they got to the top, they were not capable of swinging anything. There is a reason they put castles on hills, guys.
I have been a tourist in Budapest climbing up the stairs to Buda Castle. And let me tell you, by the time I got up without any armor on, I was not capable of doing much more than touring the building, right?
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
long way up, and it's
Yeah, absolutely.
exhausting.
So they
Uh,
put them on these hills for that reason, but you know, it's a status thing, they have to be seen, and that
yes,
continues through in this diplomatic space as well. So that throne room is a place often to hear courts, it's a place to
yes. Dispense justice, right?
dispense
Yeah.
justice and a place to be seen to be in power, not just to exert power, but to be seen to exert power. So I think
Yep.
you're absolutely right. Like that's something that's very, very critical for a certain kind of castle. And you know, something that if you're world building, that's a place to go a little bit extra. If it's a fantasy castle, think about how they might use magic to make this a little bit extra, how they might use, you know, fantastic architecture or visuals or, you know, tapestries that move. I don't know what you have in your world, but this is the space that all of those toys come out the pram. This
And
is
you,
the
yes,
impression space.
I mean, it's the height of magical interior decorating, but I want to go back to what you just said about exerting power. I think that part of what people miss about throne rooms and audience chambers is when you have a scene there, you have an opportunity to show the nature of justice, authority, and command, right?
Yeah.
If the visitor to the castle in a story or a role playing game sees that the king or the count is dispensing justice, um, it's a nice way to immediately give the character of that ruling figure. Are they dispensing justice fairly between two farmers who are arguing about a lost cow? Or is he having some, you know, dwarf immolated immediately by his court wizard and reduced to ash for being a traitor to the realm? Right? Like, okay, I like the Cow King better from a personal level, but it gives you a great opportunity to say, "Oh, you've walked in. He's just busy ruling. Oh, they are going to burn the dwarf. Okay, then." Um, it sets the tone immediately if they're taking action and exerting power.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic show don't tell. And the way that everybody is reacting to that also tells you a lot about, like, is this a kingdom where everyone believes the same? Is there dissension?
Right.
How far down or up does this leading figure's temperament go? Does how
Right.
indoctrinated are people? How much do people
Yes.
say this is right or this is wrong? Which is also interesting if you're doing storytelling, because that gives you opportunities. Who can I turn to my side? Who might be interested in what I have to say? Could I organize a coup here? How could this work?
Right. If the crowd is unruly, find out who the ringleader is.
Yeah.
If the crowd is going along with it, you're going to have to do something else. Yeah.
Yeah,
No coup.
absolutely. So you're totally right. Like, that can absolutely be the heart of the story, as it may be the heart of the castle as well. And that throne room moment is so, so strong, I think.
Yeah. We think about these spaces when we visit them in the real world as, oh, what would it be like? But I
Mm.
think our role as storytellers or as game masters is to bring those people to life through their actions. As you said, show don't tell is always a good idea. So yes, go nuts on the magical interior decorating, but also go a little wild with medieval style fantasy justice. Um,
Yeah,
if someone's
absolutely.
been polymorphed against their will into a toad, that's a fun case. So you admit you changed his form to that of a toad. Well,
I
yes.
love I love that this has become fantasy law and order castle unit, and I am here for it.
Get that sound effect. Wong. Yes.
Boom,
Law and
boom.
order. In the medieval system of justice, there are two. There's the
Okay,
king and there's everyone else. Yes.
so first of all, we have to write that RPG, because that would be amazing. And secondly, so
Right?
we've talked about the throne room and the king
Yes.
and the justice, or the queen and the justice
Yes.
and the courtiers. What about the stuff that everybody forgets? You touched
Yes.
on the kitchens. Things like the
Sure.
laundry is one that always gets me. Like, all of these
Yes.
people are they all running around in dirty underwear? How does that work?
Well,
Um,
they might be, but yes. Not the rulers, but most of the servants. Yes. I think it's fascinating to go visit these historic sites and learn horrible, gross, disgusting facts. Like, you know, the toilets of some medieval castles would just lead directly into the space between the walls, right? Like they didn't have plumbing, or it would lead directly into the moat. You would just do your
yeah.
business over the walls. It's gross, right? It must have
You gotta
smelled
hope those crocodiles can't climb. That's all
terrible.
I'm gonna say there.
But like they had stables in there too, and horses make a bigger mess than people, right? So someone
Yeah.
mucking out the stables, we forget the labors of Hercules included mucking out a stable,
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And it's just awful, awful work. So that sort of everyday dirty stuff, um, the kitchen scraps fed to the dogs, the what do we do with this leftover bath water? Do we give it to the horses or not? I, the problem with a hillside is it's a huge pain in the neck. And what I saw in many castles is the well is a
Mm,
key component of everyday living. Um, because hauling water up, 100 meters from river level or 200 meters to the castle level on the hill is just gravity sucks. And you need people who are just hauling water up. Um, and it means water's in short supply. And again, it's showing that you have the resources to actually take a heated bath without magic. That's hard. Anyway, all of those activities are great. My problem with them in storytelling is, yeah, they're often taken for granted because our heroes are often not. Um, because as a reader or as a player in a role playing game, maybe we aren't that thrilled about where the food comes from, right? Maybe we are just more thrilled about how big the feast is and not all the work that was necessary to get us there. And it's a fantasy, right? Of course,
yeah.
there was a ton of work. Somebody hunted that boar. Someone, cooked that goose. Um, but that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is the courtiers conspiring to foment the rebellion. So I like that stuff as set dressing. Like, yes, there's a groom, someone's taking care of your horse. Yes, there's a kitchen. But unless you are planning to plant secrets and spies and do espionage among the servants of the castle, which could be a lot of fun, most of the focus is on the royals, the courtiers, and the military parts of the castle. They're sexier.
That's true. I think I've watched too much sort of upstairs downstairs drama, because for me this is always so interesting. Like
Yes.
the adventure goes in so like incognito and listens to the rumors and hears how that guy who paints himself as being really great actually is really terrible to his servants, and
Right?
you're trying to get into the castle, so what do? You make friends with the servants and they let you in. Like
Yes.
these are the spaces that I always find fascinating, is like the haves and the have-nots, the upstairs and the
Yes.
downstairs dynamics, because I
I'm
feel like
100% with you on this,
echo.
and some
Yeah.
players love it and some don't.
Yeah.
Like Courts of the Shadow Fae, all of the cooking, cleaning, and servant work is done by goblins because the
Yeah.
Fae are too big and important to trouble themselves.
Yeah.
But if you find the goblin servant hall, it's a hotbed of rumor and information, and you can get anywhere through secret passages, right? Like, but you have to be willing and capable to be smooth and charming enough to get in with the servants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you say, that appeals to a certain kind of player. And I think that there are, if you're doing castles and you feel like you don't want to do something that's been done to death, have a fight scene in the laundry. Sneak into the
Yes.
kitchens. Do you see what I mean? Like these are
Mhm.
spaces that I feel people don't explore as much
Right?
as they could be explored, and they are rich with opportunity. They are rich with interesting NPCs who have their
Yes.
own struggles. If you get in good with them, you can learn a lot about what's going on, because these are the people who hear and see everything
Yes.
um, within a castle space.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's not for everyone, and it's not for every kind of game. If you are playing power fantasy, you may not want to make friends with Betsy the Maid. If you're
No.
playing intrigue, it could be very useful.
Could be very useful indeed. Betsy the Maid might be your best agent on the
Yeah, exactly.
inside.
So, with that in mind, what kinds of opportunities are there for quests and side quests in a castle? Now, that could be a castle that the adventurers own, or it can be a castle that the adventurers do not own.
Well, there's dozens and hundreds of possibilities, right? And I think some of them are, as you were saying, the intrigue elements. Bring the message to the ruler and try not to get your head chopped off, right? Get to the castle and seek justice for the poor local miller who's been polymorphed into a toad. Right? You can go and perform the functions of the castle as it's meant, as a seat of power and administration, right? Like if you are a wee tiny hero just beginning a career, you're not storming the castle. You're showing up with a message. You're saying, I'm here to escort someone away from the castle or to seek justice. The higher level and more powerful and more epic power fantasy you get, the more I think the castle's role is not government administration and justice, but usually turns into some difficult figure is there, or something needs to be removed from the castle in contravention of the laws of the land, right? You're no longer working within the framework of the castle is right, just, and we're using the castle to achieve our goals. You're working in the framework of the castle's in our way.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kingmaker comes to mind as
Yes.
a thing where, you start out with, spoiler alert, if you've never played this, you start out with the Stag Lord. The Stag Lord's kind of a douche. You get rid of the Stag Lord, suddenly you have a castle. Hooray! And that tends to be the way that a lot of these plots are formed.
Absolutely. I mean, the ruined castle that's full of monsters or has an evil overlord often turn into the home base for the players.
Yeah.
And so at that point, of course, you're switching from conquering the castle, clearing out the castle, resolving the troubles at the castle, and now you have the problems of ownership. And I delight in this because This is very similar to, acquiring a boat. The
Mhm.
best days of owning a castle are the first day you own the castle. Yay, I own a castle. Hooray. And the last day you own a castle, you go, oh my God, that thing cost me 100,000 gold pieces, and it's still a big, messy pile of rock. I am so happy to foist it off on my underling, right?
As
Um,
Cassie Weaver says, castles can be money pits. Yes,
They
they can.
really are. And the Castles and Crowns project includes a whole bunch of things about how long does it take to build a castle? How much does it cost to, build this kind of tower? Um, let's put some gold piece values on that fancy tower full of prisoners. But yeah, Money Pit. I think there's a great lot of side questing and adventuring about. We need an architect. We don't have the right kind of stone. We need a roof. The well is spoiled. Everything, basically, it's home ownership fantasy style. And it's worse because everything's built of stone and decorated and stained glass. And oh, by the way, it's a status symbol with a great hall, and you need to make a good impression.
Yeah,
So yeah, the cheap version of the thatch roof will never do.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that takes me to my next question, which is once you have a castle, once you've taken your castle from the Stag Lord or whatever, there's always some butthole who wants to take the castle from you. Do you know
From
what I mean? Like
you!
the minute you get a castle, you have a target painted on your back where somebody's like, you have a castle. I would like a castle.
I would like your castle.
Yes, exactly. So let's talk about, and this will be a bit of a quick round,
Okay.
attacking and defending castles in Fantasyland. And I want
Yes.
to start with aerial defense because dragons. Aerial
Right.
defense for castles. How can this work in a Fantasyland? Defense and attack.
I mean, you are fortunate in that castles are relatively flame proof on the exterior walls and stone towers. This is why I don't really put wooden palisades in the same category, right?
Mm,
Um, but if you've looked at most real world castles, you'll see the battlements often contain wood. There are wooden stairs, there are wooden rafters. Heck, we saw Notre Dame burn, right? Like, it's a
we
big
did.
pile of stone cathedral. I know. But it's also wood is a major component and it catches fire. So there's a couple of ways to hand wave it, and there's a couple of ways I think you can do better. Hand waving it is you say the court wizard or the high priest or the local druid has flame proofed my castle.
Mm,
Or, and I have done exactly what they do for pigeons in the big city. I put dragon spikes on the roof. Perhaps you are unfamiliar with dragon spikes, but I think you know what I'm talking about. They're pikes that you stick on the rooftop so the dragons can't land there.
amazing.
And just like keeping pigeons off of statues and public architecture in the big city, this helps you a little with aerial defense, and it's relatively cheap, and it looks pointy and dangerous. So that's sort of the cheap cheats. I think
Yeah.
the other form of aerial defense is, I kind of believe the job of the court wizard is partly to do aerial defense, right?
Interesting.
One of the reasons you keep a court wizard around is there aren't a lot of flying monsters coming, but when there are, your archers might not be enough, and you need to throw fireballs at it, right?
Absolutely.
So,
I have to say, if I were attacking a castle, I would get a dragon with two things of boiling oil and
ooh,
just
nice,
let that happen. Just just
right?
just drop it and then just set it on fire and then just fly away. That's what if I were to attack a castle in a fantasy land, I think that would be my approach.
My favorite approach with dragons isn't. I think the boiling oil is great, actually, and I may use that in a future home game.
You-
But the other one I think is nice is saying, well, dragons are effectively fantasy helicopters. And I would strap, 20 men at arms to one and give them some ropes and
Oh,
have
drop
the,
pods.
yes, little drop pods and, have it hover like a hummingbird or a kestrel for a brief moment over the ramparts, drop off my 20 elite commandos. dwarves with axes, and they open the gate for everyone else. So that
I love that. Yeah.
that could drop
I'm
pods.
here for drop pods. I'm here for flying boiling oil. To be fair, flying boiling oil makes everything better. What are we talking about? Okay, the other very popular way historically
Mm,
to get rid of a castle is to undermine it. This is one of the reasons. So there is a belief that square towers were replaced with round towers because of the improvement in ballistics, and that is somewhat true, but also round towers crumble less dramatically when they are undermined, which is one
yes.
of the reasons that there was that big change. And yes, when I say undermined, I mean literally people dug mines underneath the walls so that they could collapse. How are we dealing with this in Fantasyland? Attack and defense. Go.
Well, attack. You get some sort of digging creature like a gigantic worm or a squadron of dwarves, and you send it in, and then you get, depending on whether you're a gunpowder campaign or not, right? You get something explosive, or you just make a big enough sinkhole that the wall collapses. You don't actually need gunpowder, right? If you just make a big enough hole, you've weakened the wall and it falls down. Hooray! Um, but I think the more fun way to do this is, well, or the faster storytelling approach to this
Yeah.
is something like a magic horn. Let's get biblical, right? Jericho, the walls shall,
Jericho.
right? And if you have a horn that blasts walls down, that'll do it. That's quick. It's dramatic. There's a big noise. Come on, boys. Let's go for the breach.
Love
Um,
that.
so I think the sort of sneaky back and forth is more realistic, of mining and counter mining. But the let's just, turn that earth to quicksand and watch the wall tumble is faster and flashier.
Yeah, I love that picture. And definitely if your heroes are on the outside, that's a very nice kind of one-off magic weapon to give them.
Right? If
You know,
you're
you get 3 blasts.
defending, yes, 3 blasts and that's it. So choose
Yeah.
wisely. Round tower or square tower? Uh,
Now you know.
now you know.
So defending your walls against pesky giant naked mole rats or whatever we have digging them up.
Whatever we have digging them up, right? On the one hand, magic makes this all easier. Magical defense, divination spells pay for themselves here, right? The old tricks of have a bowl of water and see if it quivers, to see if someone's mining down below, or just pay a bunch of cheap kobolds to countermine, right? So that by the time they're halfway to the moat, you say, okay, this is it. Unleash the moat water into their mine, and the attackers suddenly have to deal with skunky moat water and alligators. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so do it to them first is one way, but I think it's always harder to defend this static position. I forget who it was. Patton? Some U.S. general said static fortifications are monuments to the stupidity of mankind, because because he thought in an age of gunpowder and mobile warfare, right? They're too easy. They're just sitting there waiting to be hit. In historical terms, I think what we forget is the sally.
Yeah.
If you send your knights out of the castle because you know where they're mining, and you set their mine on fire, or you kill the miners, or you just ride out and make
boiling oil. Boiling oil
boiling oil,
sells everything. Goes
right? Like,
down, gets in all the cracks.
I think we forget that the castle walls can, in fact, be opened, the drawbridge can be dropped, and a thundering herd of tanks on 4 legs can be unleashed to wreak havoc on besieging forces. So perhaps that's a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if they have burrowing animals, nothing stops you having burrowing animals.
Your burrowing animals need to be meaner than their burrowing animals.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Give them boiling oil. This is
boiling oil, kobolds
my
with
new
boiling
favorite
oil.
thing. Kobolds with boiling oil. This is the secret to all problems. Oh yes, and finally the
The
siege. This is
full-on
an
siege.
iconic castle moment. They're
It is.
outside. They've set up shop. They are not going anywhere. They're trying to starve you out on the inside, or get you to run out of water, or hope that your disease takes hold of your people within the castle. You are trapped in a fantasy world. How do sieges work?
Right? In a fantasy world, it's a lot harder to besiege and starve if there's any magical food at all and magical water at all. Um, but I think we can hand wave a little of that if we say the castle has more mouths to feed and, you know, more thirsty troops in the barracks than you can reasonably produce food and water for over the long haul. I think the interesting thing about sieges, story-wise, is they take forever, right? Like, these are months and months and months, and sometimes years of sitting around. And the dramatic moment we see of the siege of, I don't know, Helm's Deep or something, those are brief bits. Most of it's sitting around waiting for people to starve. And that's, in story terms, a little bit
Boring gameplay.
Boring gameplay.
Stories. Yeah.
And in story, like, I think what you want to pick out for sieges when you're doing this world building, when you're planning your sieges, is to talk about the keystone plot turns, right? Like the beats.
Yeah.
And the beats are: the army arrives and lays siege. The defenders attempt to sally and fail. The defenders run out of food or water, right? The attackers attempt a night attack, right? Like, you can plan 3 or 4 events. And in between, you might say, well, it's 2 months before the garrison runs out of food, so we're just going to advance the timeline 2 months.
Just downtime it, yeah.
Right? And then the besieging army gets sick, and they're like, oh, hell, this is bad, right? All right, we're going to give it one last try, storm the walls, send in the dragon with the boiling oil. We're going to do it today, or we'll never do it. Yeah. And if they fail, they slink away, right? Yeah. So I would focus on those moments of high drama, rather than day by day bean counting of how much how much grain is left, how skunky is the water, how many rats have we eaten, are there any rats left. That's fun for about 5 minutes.
In the Siege of Paris, they ate the zoo. Did you know about this?
No.
Yeah, they ate the zoo, and on Christmas Day there was this very special menu of all the things, all the animals that they ate. It's actually very sad. I shouldn't be grinning, but I find it fascinating. Yeah.
Well, the story of the Siege of Vienna, the Ottomans, in theory, left behind coffee beans when they fled at the end of the Siege of Vienna, and legend has it.
And the Wiener Kaffee House was born.
And this is how the coffee house was born, right?
That's amazing. I had no idea. All right, I have more siege stories that we should not share, but I will just highlight Alexander's comment about flinging cows over the walls.
Oh, yes.
Very iconic siege moment. If anybody is in a siege, moldy cows should go over the walls. Please make it happen. This is my personal request to you.
Right. Absolutely. It's gross. It's horrible. It will get the blood boiling.
Yeah, it's awful on all sides, and I love it. I love it.
I don't want to be the siege engineer responsible for getting the cow on the catapult.
Right. I'm not even going to think about like its cohesive structure at that point and its decay. But anyway, let's move on. So you have literally written a whole book about creating castles for role-playing games and all of the stuff that goes around that. What was your biggest takeaway when specifically like trying to help GMs with castles for players? What was the biggest thing where you were like, oh, holy crap, it has to be this, or this is always going to be a problem?
I think there's 2 or 3 things, right? There's 2 camps of players in role-playing games. There are those who want to model and simulate the castle as an economic system, as an architectural project. Like, they want blueprints and like, you know, a foreman to bring in the beams and like figuring out how is it put together.
Verisimilitude, bean counting.
The simulationist view of castle building, which I think is great, and Castles and Crowns supports it to some degree. Like, here's what it costs, here's the time, but it's not down to you'll need a, you know, this many acres of wood to turn into timber. No, no, no. Um, the other side is the narrativist people in castles, which is more of what we've been talking about here. Like, what are the stories around castle? Who are the people in the castle? What do we do when we get there? What did the king just do, dispensing justice, right? And that's all adventure hooks. My sense is that by and large, having things like, here are 15 characters ready to drop into any castle, from the cook to the dungeon keeper to the groom to the court wizard to the junior noble to the heir, that's useful. That's a tool that the game players can say, oh, I'm going to put the name I need on this, but it's a particular archetype or role, and now I have statistics and a bunch of plot hooks for him. I'm set. The other thing that's fascinating with castles, that I'm not terribly good at it, and I appreciate those who are, is actually getting floor plans and maps that are playable and fun. They exist, but not as much as you think, right?
Interesting.
And Castles and Crowns in particular has some isometric multi-layer castles where you have there's a map folio that's like a wet dry erase map folio, and each level of the castle is in there. And the tilt yard for the jousts is a separate map, right? Like, you can have all these pieces. It's sometimes just hunting down the right map will inspire the right kind of story. So part of the Castles and Crowns Kickstarter is indeed this big old map folio full of, palaces, hunting lodges, small keeps, big keeps, multi-layer castles. I find that a really useful tool.
Amazing. Do you have any big warnings for when you give your RPG players a castle? Any, like, whatever you do, do not ...
Well, don't give them one in good condition. You want it to be a money pit. Like, if it's a new castle when they get there, it should be bombed, burned, and covered in the remnants of boiling oil by the time they've conquered it, right? See? Right? Like, it should be in need of repair.
Yeah.
Or haunted or something. We haven't even gotten into hauntings. We don't have time. But
I wanted to talk about abandoned castles and all of that stuff, but I have too many castle questions. Is basically my issue here.
Right. It's such a rich mine of ideas and legends and lore.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm hearing is, make sure that it's messed up when they get it, so that they have some work to do, they have some money to do. Certainly giving players something to do with all that gold at a certain point in a campaign. Castles can be so useful for managing that sort of player economy, and just when they start to feel like, we have so much gold, we can do anything, you give them a castle. Oh man, they do not have enough gold.
Well, but they are getting something out of it. This is why the castle money pit works. They are getting status. They are getting reputation. They are getting other people saying, why don't I have a castle on the hill? Right?
Yeah. Amazing. So you've mentioned there's a lot about castles in there, but I know there's a lot of other stuff too in Castles and Crowns. Can you give us just the soupçon of what else we can find in there?
It's everything from who lives in the castle, what are their stories, how do you build it. It's also heavy on the fantasy. There's a section on royal magic, rituals for anointing an heir, magical crowns, spells that only nobles can cast in a ritual manner at certain times, right? Artifacts of nobility, creatures that haunt castles or noble families. There's a whole section on assassination as a nice shortcut to avoid sieges, right?
That's why you make friends with Betsy.
Yes. And there's a section, there's a shortcut on sieges and warfare. It's not a whole mass combat system. That's called Warhammer or something else, right? But there's a whole thing on how to run intrigue and diplomacy campaigns. So those tools are all great, because some people do want to run that sort of intrigue-based gameplay, but it's very different from the power fantasy combat, go get the MacGuffin gameplay. And there's a lot of good advice there, and concrete step-by-step, how do you run it?
Amazing. So there are 5 days left on this Kickstarter. It has already been like funded to the gazillionth degree.
Oh, yes.
They're churning out churning out stretch goals. All of the things are
Mhm.
going in. So what I will say is I've never had a bad Kobold Press book ever.
Oh,
So if you like the idea of playing Castles and Crowns in something that is both 5e compatible and Tales of the Valiant compatible,
correct.
then you can go and check this out. I will never say you have to buy something. Absolutely, that's not the name of the game, but it's a very, very exciting, like, giant set of GM's tools that's really, really going to help you. And if you have enjoyed thinking about castles, thinking you might want to tell stories in your own castles, or if you're a writer and you're thinking, damn, I'd like some castle floor plans so I can plan what's going on in my story easier. You know what? I know it's for role players, but it's absolutely full of amazing resources. I am very, very excited for this one.
This is a good one.
And that is all we have time for today, folks. I know, right? It always
goes
so
so
quick when I'm talking to
fast.
Wolfgang. What can I say? So, speaking of that Warhammer stuff, we will be raiding Lore Hammering in just a moment. Of course, another Anvilite. Andy Law, the creator of Warhammer Fantasy and all sorts of other fun stuff, will be. I think they're doing live play today. I think today is their live play game. So you could go check out some Warhammer Fantasy. And why not ask them about all their castles in the chat? Why not do that? That would be awesome.
I like
And
it.
I'll apologize to Andy later.
He'll
Folks,
never see it coming.
Right, exactly. Do you know why? Because it will be an underground naked mole rat attack.
It's very Warhammer. Chaos creatures.
I feel this works. Rohan Reed, you are so welcome. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. A few good friends of World Anvil in the chat: Alexander, Amanda, Delana, and Dead Aussie Gamer, all showing up to fly the colors. It's been a pleasure, of course, seeing you all. And Wolfgang, I have so much fun chatting with you. Thank you so much for the gift of your knowledge and your presence here
Thank you
today.
for having me. It's been a delight. And yes, castles all day, all night. My favorite.
Castles. We're going to make it happen. Castles and boiling oil. Folks, we are live tomorrow with two very special things. Yes, we are launching Spooktober, our spooky October challenge of multimedia joyous creation. Make stat books, make flash fiction, make RPGs. I don't know. Get inspired. It's all going down tomorrow. And of course, we are also playing a somewhat spooky RPG game. Yes, we are welcoming the Ethnis team. Demetrius, myself, Jacqueline, and Baron will all be live playing the first chapter of a very special RPG built on World Anvil, all World Anvil things, all World Anvil people. So do come along to support the community and also have loads of fun, because you all know that I can't play a serious character. I'm just here to lick rocks and have fun. Yeah. So that's all going down tomorrow. I wish you all the very, very best of time zones. And I would like to invite you to grab your hammer and go world build. Castles, please.